Good evening. Welcome to Lumina Theater Group's performance reading of An Inspector Calls by J.B. Priestley. We're glad you could join us this evening, the first play reading in our four-play fall series. The play will last for about an hour and 20 minutes. Now sit back, relax, grab your favorite beverage and snack, and enjoy An Inspector Calls. It is an evening in spring, 1912, and we're in the dining room of a large suburban house belonging to Arthur Burling, a prosperous manufacturer. Burling, his wife, their children, Eric and Sheila's fiancé, Gerald, are seated at the dining table.
Well, this is very nice. Very nice. Good dinner too, Sybil. Tell cook from me.
Absolutely first class.
Arthur, you're not supposed to say such things.
Oh, come. I'm treating Gerald like one of the family, and I'm sure he won't object.
Go on, Gerald. Just you object.
Wouldn't dream of it. In fact, I insist upon being one of the family now. I've been trying long enough, haven't I? Haven't I? You know I have.
Of course she does.
Yes, except for all last summer when you never came near me and I wondered what had happened to you.
And I've told you I was awfully busy at the works all the time.
Yes, that's what you say.
Now, Sheila, don't tease him. When you're married, you'll realize that men with important work to do sometimes have to spend nearly all their time and energy on business. You'll have to get used to that, just as
I don't believe I will. So you be careful.
Oh, I will. I will.
Now, Arthur, what about this famous toast of yours?
Oh yes, of course. Well, Gerald, I know you agree that we should only have this quiet family party, and I'm not sorry that we're quietly celebrating like this.
Much nicer, really.
I agree.
So do I. But it makes speech-making more difficult.
Well, don't do any. We'll drink their health and I'm done with it.
No, we won't. It's one of the happiest nights of my life. Gerald, I'm going to tell you frankly, without any pretenses, that your engagement to Sheila means a tremendous lot to me. You're just the kind of son-in-law I always wanted. Your father and I have been friendly rivals in business for some time now, though Crofts and Limited are both older and bigger than Burling and Company. And now you've brought us together. And perhaps we may look forward to the time when Crofts and Burling are no longer competing, but working together for lower costs and higher prices.
Hear, hear. And I think my father would agree to that.
Now, Arthur, I don't think you ought to talk business on an occasion like this.
Neither do I. All wrong.
Quite so. I agree with you. I only mentioned it in passing. So, here's wishing the pair of you the very best that life can bring, Gerald and Sheila.
Yes, Gerald. Yes, Sheila, darling. Our congratulations and very best wishes.
All the best. She's got a nasty temper sometimes, but she's not really that bad. Good old Sheila.
Mom, I can't drink to this, can I? When do I drink?
You can drink to me.
All right, then. I drink to you, Gerald.
Thank you. And I drink to you, and hope I can make you as happy as you deserve to be.
You be careful, or I'll start weeping.
Well, perhaps this will help to stop it.
Oh, Gerald, you've got it. Is it the one you wanted me to have?
Yes, the very one.
Oh, it's wonderful. Look, Mummy, isn't it a beauty? Oh, darling, I think it's perfect. Now I really feel engaged.
Well, it came at just the right moment. That was clever of you, Gerald. Now, Arthur, if you've no more to say, I think Sheila and I had better go off into the drawing room and leave.
I just want to say this. Are you listening, Sheila? This concerns you. After all, I don't often make speeches.
I was listening.
No, I want to say this. There's been a good deal of silly talk about these days, and I speak as a hard-headed businessman who has to take risks and know what he's about. I say you can ignore it. Oh, when you marry, you'll be marrying at a very good time. Yes, a very good time. Last month, because those miners came out on strike, there's a lot of wild talk about possible labor trouble in the future. Don't worry. We passed the worst of it. We employers at last are coming together to see that our interests and the interests of capital are properly protected. And we're in for a time of steadily increasing prosperity.
I believe you're right, sir.
What about war?
Glad you mentioned it, Eric. I'm coming to that. Just because the Kaiser makes a speech or two, you'll hear some people say that war is inevitable. Well, I say to that, fiddlesticks. The Germans don't want war. Nobody wants war. And why? Because there's too much at stake these days. Everything to lose and nothing to gain by war.
Yes, I know, but still.
Let me finish, Eric. You've got a lot to learn yet, and I'm talking as a hard-headed, practical man of business. And I say there isn't a chance of war. The world's developing so fast that it'll make war impossible. What? Look at the progress we're making. In a year or two, we'll have airplanes that'll be able to go anywhere. And look at ships. Why, a friend of mine went over on this new liner last week, the Titanic. She sails next week, Southampton to New York in 5 days. And every luxury, unsinkable, absolutely unsinkable. That's what you've got to keep your eye on. Facts like that, progress like that. And not a few scaremongers here making a fuss about nothing. Now, you three young people, well, just listen to this. And remember that I'm telling you now. In 20 or 30 years' time, let's see it, 1940 or so, you'll be giving a little party like this. Your son or daughter might be getting engaged. And I tell you, by that time, you'll be living in a world that has forgotten all of these capital versus labor agitations and all these silly little war scares. There'll be peace and prosperity and rapid progress everywhere, except, of course, in Russia, which will always be behindhand naturally.
Arthur.
Oh, yes, my dear, I know I'm talking too much. but you youngsters just remember what I said. We can't let these Bernard Shaws and H.G. Wellses do all the talking. We hard-headed, practical businessmen must say something sometime.
Yes, of course, dear. Well, don't keep Gerald in here too long. Eric, I want you a minute.
Oh, port?
Thank you.
Oh, by the way, there's something I want to mention in strict confidence while we're by ourselves. You know, I have an idea that your mother, Mrs. Croft, well, she doesn't object to my girl, feels you could have done better for yourself socially. No, Gerald, that's all right. I don't blame her. She comes from an old country family, landed people, and so forth, and so it's only natural. But what I wanted to say is, there's a fair chance that I might find myself in the next administration. Just an ambassadorial position, of course.
Oh, I say, congratulations.
Thanks. It's a bit too early for that, but don't say anything. But I've got a hint or two. I gather there's a good chance for an ambassadorship, so long as we behave ourselves, don't get into police court or start a scandal, eh?
You seem to be a nice, well-behaved family.
Oh, we think we are. But you can promise your mother will try to keep out of trouble during the next few months.
What's the joke? Started telling stories?
No. Hey, want another glass of port?
Oh, yes, please. Mo says we mustn't stay too long, but I don't think it matters. I left him talking about clothes again. You'd think a girl never had any clothes before she gets married. Women are potty about them.
Yes, but you've got to remember, my boy, that clothes mean something quite different to a woman. Not just something to wear, not only something to make them look prettier, but, well, a sort of sign or token of their self-respect.
That's true.
Yes, I remember.
Well, what do you remember?
Nothing.
Nothing.
Sounds a bit fishy to me.
Yes, you don't know what some of these boys get up to nowadays. But this is the point. I don't want to lecture you two young fellows again. But what so many of you don't seem to understand now, and when things are so much easier, is that a man has to make his own way, has to look after himself. And And his family, too, of course, when he has one. And so long as he does that, oh, he won't come to much harm. But the way some of these cranks talking right now, you think everybody has to look after everybody else, a society and all that nonsense. Take my word for it, you youngsters. Oh, I've learned from the hard school of experience that a man has to mind his own business and look after himself in his own. And
Somebody at the front door.
I know we'll answer it. Well, have another glass of port, Gerald, and we'll join the ladies. That'll stop me from giving you good advice.
Yes, you've piled it on a bit tonight, Father.
Oh, special occasion. And feeling contented for once. I wanted you to have the benefit of my experience.
Please, sir, an inspector's called.
An inspector? What kind of inspector?
A police inspector. He says his name's Inspector Gould.
Oh, don't know him. Does he want to see me?
Well, yes, sir. He says it's very important.
All right, Edna. Show him in here. I'm still a judge. It may be something about a warrant.
Sure to be, unless Eric's been up to something. And that would be awkward, wouldn't it?
Yeah, very.
Only something we were talking about when you were out. A joke, really.
Well, I don't think it's very funny.
What's the matter with you?
Nothing.
Inspector Gould.
Mr. Burling.
Yes, sit down, Inspector.
Thank you, sir.
Have a glass of port or some whiskey?
No, thank you, Mr. Burling. I'm on duty.
You're new, aren't you?
Yes, sir. Only recently transferred.
I thought I'd never seen you before.
Quite so.
Well, what can I do for you? Some trouble about a warrant?
No, Mr. Burling.
Well, what is it then?
I'd like some information, if you don't mind, Mr. Burling. 2 hours ago, a young woman died in the infirmary. She'd been taken there this afternoon because she'd swallowed a lot of strong disinfectant. It burnt her inside out, of course.
Oh, God.
Yes, she was in great agony. They did everything they could for her at the infirmary, but she died. Suicide, of course.
Yes, horrid business, but I don't understand why you should come here, Inspector.
I've been around to the room she had, and she'd left a letter there and a sort of diary. Like a lot of these young women who get into various kinds of trouble, she'd used more than one name, but her original name, her real name, was Eva Smith.
Eva Smith?
Do you remember her, Mr. Burling?
No. I seem to remember hearing that name, Eva Smith, somewhere, but it doesn't convey anything to me, and I don't see where I come into this.
She was employed in your works at one time.
Oh, that's it, is it? Well, we have several hundred young women there, you know. They keep changing.
This young woman, Eva Smith, was out of the ordinary. I found a photograph of her in her lodgings. Perhaps you'd remember her from that.
Any particular reason why I shouldn't see this girl's photograph, Inspector?
There might be.
And the same applies to me, I suppose.
Yes.
I can't imagine what it could be.
Neither can I.
And I must say, I agree with them, Inspector.
It's the way I like to go to work. One person and one line of inquiry at a time. Otherwise, there's a muddle.
I see. Very sensible, really. You've had enough of that porn, Eric.
I think you remember Eva Smith now, don't you, Mr. Burling?
Yes, I do. She was one of my employees, and then I discharged her.
Why, she committed suicide. When was this, Father?
Well, keep quiet, Eric, and don't get excited. This girl left us nearly 2 years ago. Let me see. It must have been in the early autumn of 1910.
Yes, end of September, 1910.
That's right, that's right.
Look here, sir. Wouldn't you rather I was out of this?
I don't mind your being here, Gerald. And I'm sure you've no objection, have you, Inspector? But perhaps I should explain first. This is Mr. Gerald Croft, the son of Mr. George Croft. You know, Croft Limited.
Mr. Gerald Croft, eh? I'd prefer you to stay.
Oh, all right.
Look, there's nothing mysterious or scandalous about this business. At least not so far as I'm concerned. It's a perfectly straightforward case as it happened more than 18 months ago, nearly 2 years ago. obviously has nothing to do with the wretched girl's suicide, eh, Inspector?
No, sir, I can't agree with you there.
Well, why not?
Because what happened to her then may have determined what happened to her afterwards, and what happened to her afterwards may have driven her to suicide, a chain of events.
Oh, well, still, I can't accept any responsibility. If we were all responsible for everything that happened to everybody, but we'd had anything to do with it, it would be very awkward, wouldn't it?
Very awkward.
We'd all be in an impossible situation, wouldn't we?
By Jove, yes. As you were saying, Dad, a man has to look after himself.
Yes, well, we need to go into all of that.
Go into what?
Oh, just before you came, I was giving these young men a little good advice. Now, about this girl, Eva Smith. I remember her quite well now. She was a lively, good-looking girl, country-bred, I fancy, and she's been working in one of our machine shops for over a year. A good worker, too. In fact, the foreman there told me he was ready to promote her into what we call a leading operator, head of a small group of girls. But after they came back from holidays that August, they were all rather restless, and they decided to ask for more money. They were averaging about $10, and which was neither more nor less than was paid generally in our industry. They wanted the rates raised so that they could average about $11 a week. Well, I refused, of course.
Why?
Did you say why?
Yes, why did you refuse?
Well, Inspector, I don't see that it's any of a concern of yours. How I choose to run my business, is it now?
It might be, you know.
I don't like that tone.
I'm sorry, but you asked me a question.
And you asked me a question before that, a quite unnecessary question, too.
It's my duty to ask questions.
Well, it's my duty to keep labor costs down, and if I'd agreed to this demand for a new rate, we'd have added about 12% to our labor costs. Oh, does that satisfy you? So I refused. Said I couldn't consider it. We were paying the usual rates, and if they didn't like it, they could go and work somewhere else. It's a free country, I told them.
It isn't if you can't go and work somewhere else.
Quite so.
Look, just you keep out of this. You hadn't even started at the works when this happened. Oh, so they went on strike. It didn't last long, of course.
Not if it was just after the holidays. They'd be all broke if I know them.
Right, Gerald. They mostly were. And so was the strike after about a week or two. Pitiful affair. Well, we let them all come back at their old rates, and except the 4 or 5 ringleaders who started the trouble, I went down myself and told them to clear out. And this girl, Eva Smith, was one of them. She had a lot to say, far too much, so we had to let her go.
You couldn't have done anything else.
He could. He could have kept her on instead of throwing her out. I call it tough luck.
Rubbish! If you don't come down sharply on some of these people, they'll soon be asking for the earth.
I should say so.
Well, I think it's a damn shame. Why shouldn't they try for higher wages? We try for the highest possible prices. And I don't see why she should have been sacked just because she's had a bit more spirit than the others. You said yourself she was a good worker. I'd have let her stay.
Unless you brighten your ideas, you'll never be in a position to let anybody to go. I told the girl to clear out, and she went. That's the last I heard of her. Have you any idea what happened to her after that? Did she get into trouble? Go on to the streets?
No, she didn't exactly go on the streets.
What's this about the streets? Oh, sorry, I didn't know. Mommy sent me in to ask you why I didn't come along to the drawing room.
We shall be going along in a minute now, just finishing.
I'm afraid not.
There's nothing else, you know. I just told you that.
What's all this about?
Oh, nothing more to do with you, Sheila. Just run along.
Now, wait a minute, Miss Burling.
Look, here, Inspector. I consider this uncalled for and officious. I have half a mind to report you. I've told you all I know, and it doesn't seem to me very important. And now there isn't the slightest reason why my daughter should be dragged into this unpleasant business.
What business? What's happening?
I'm a police inspector, Miss Burling. This afternoon, a young woman drank some disinfectant and died after several hours of agony tonight in the infirmary.
How horrible. Was it an accident?
No, she wanted to end her life. She felt she couldn't go on any longer.
Well, don't tell me it's because I discharged her from my employment nearly 2 years ago.
That might have started it.
Dad.
Yes, the girl had been causing trouble in the works. I was quite justified.
Yes, I think you were. Well, I know we'd have done the same thing. Don't look like that, Sheila.
Sorry. It's just that I can't help thinking about this girl destroying herself so horribly. And I've been so happy tonight. Oh, I wish you hadn't told me. What was she like? Quite young?
Yes, 24.
Pretty?
She wasn't pretty when I saw her today, but she had been pretty, very pretty.
Oh, that's enough of that.
And I don't really see that this inquiry gets you anywhere, Inspector. It's what happened to her since she left Mr. Burling's work that is important.
Obviously, I suggested that some time ago.
And we can't help you there because we don't know.
Are you sure you don't know?
And you're suggesting now that one of them knows something about the girl?
Yes.
You didn't come here just to see me, then?
No.
Well, of course, I'm sorry. That does make a difference. You sure of your facts?
Some of them, yes.
I can't think they can be of any great consequence.
The girl's dead, though.
You mean by saying that? You talk as if we were responsible for
Now,
it.
just a minute, Sheila. Now, Inspector, perhaps you and I had better go talk this over quietly in a corner.
Why should you? He's finished with you. He says it's one of us now.
Yes, and I'm trying to settle it sensibly for you.
Well, there's nothing to settle as far as I'm concerned. I've never known Eva Smith.
Neither have I.
What's her name? Eva Smith?
Yes.
Never heard it before.
So where are you now, Inspector?
Where I was before, Mr. Croft. I told you, like a lot of these young women, she'd used more than one name. She was still Eva Smith when Mr. Burling sacked her, for wanting $11 a week instead of 10. But after that, she stopped being Eva Smith. Perhaps she'd had enough of it.
I can't blame her.
It's a mean thing to do. Perhaps that spoiled everything for her.
Rubbish! Do you know what happened to the girl after she left my works?
Yes, she hadn't been able to save much out of what Burling and company had paid her. So that after 2 months with no work, lonely, half-starved, she was feeling desperate.
I should think so. It's a rotten shame.
There are a lot of young women living that sort of existence in every city and big town in this country, Miss Burling. If there weren't, the factories and warehouses wouldn't know where to look for cheap labor. Ask your father.
These girls aren't cheap labor, they're people.
I've had that notion myself from time to time.
But what happened to her then?
Well, she had what seemed to her a wonderful stroke of luck. She was taken on in a shop, and a good shop, too. Millward's.
Millward's. We go there. She was lucky to get taken on at Millward's.
After about a couple of months, just when she felt she was settling down nicely, they told her she'd have to go.
Not doing her work properly.
There was nothing wrong with the way she was doing her work. They admitted that.
Well, there must have been something wrong.
All she knew was that a customer complained about her, and so she had to go.
When was this?
At the end of January last year.
Well, what did this girl look like?
If you'll come over here, I'll show you.
Oh. Oh. Oh.
What's the matter with her?
You recognized her from the photograph, didn't she?
Yes.
Why the devil did you want to go upsetting the child like that?
I didn't do it. She's upsetting herself.
Shall I go after her?
No, leave this to me. I must have a word with my wife, tell her what's happening. We were having a nice family celebration tonight. And a nasty mess you've made of it now, haven't you?
That's more or less what I was thinking earlier tonight, when I was in the infirmary looking down at what was left of Eva Smith. Nice little promising life there, I thought. And a nasty mess somebody's made of it.
I'd like to have a look at that photograph now, Inspector.
All in good time.
I don't see why.
You heard what I said before, Mr. Croft. One line of inquiry at a time. If you've anything to tell me, you'll have an opportunity of doing it soon.
I don't suppose I have.
I'm sorry. But you see, we were having a little party. I've had a few drinks, including rather a lot of champagne, and I've got a headache. And as I'm only in the way, so I think I'd better turn in.
And I think you'd better stay here.
Why should I?
It might be less trouble. If you turn in, you might have to turn out again soon.
Getting a little heavy-handed, aren't you, Inspector? After all, you know, we're respectable citizens and not criminals.
Sometimes there isn't much difference as you think. Often, if it was left to me, I wouldn't know where to draw the line. Well, Miss Burling,
Knew it was me all the time, didn't you?
I had an idea it might be. From something the girl herself wrote.
I told my father. He didn't seem to think it amounted to much. But I felt rotten about it at the time, and now I feel a lot worse. Did it make much difference to her?
Yes, I'm afraid it did. It was the last real steady job she had.
So I'm really responsible.
No, not entirely. A good deal happened to her after that. But you're partly to blame, just as your father is.
But what did Sheila do?
I went to the manager at Millward's, and I told him that if they didn't get rid of that girl, I'd never go near the place again, and I'd persuade Mother to close our account with them.
And why did you do that?
Because I was in a furious temper.
What had this girl done to make you lose your temper?
When I was looking at myself in the mirror, I caught sight of her smiling at the assistant, and I was furious with her. I'd been in a bad temper anyhow.
Was it the girl's fault?
No, not really. It was my own fault. I'd gone in to try something on. It was an idea of my own. Mother had been against it, and so had the assistant. But I insisted. As soon as I tried it on, I knew they'd been right. It just didn't suit me at all. I looked silly in the thing. Well, this girl had brought the dress up from the workroom, and when the assistant, Miss Francis, had asked her something about it, this girl, to show us what she meant, she had held the dress up as if she was wearing it. And it just suited her. She was the right type for it, just as I was the wrong type. She was very pretty, too, with big dark eyes, and that didn't make it any better. Well, when I tried the thing on and looked at myself and knew that it was all wrong, I caught sight of this girl smiling at Miss Francis, as if to say, doesn't she look awful? And I was absolutely furious. I was very rude to both of them. And then I went to the manager and told him that this girl had been very impertinent. And how could I know what would happen afterwards? If she'd been some miserable, plain little creature, I don't suppose I'd have done it, but she was very pretty and looked as if she could take care of herself. I couldn't be sorry for her.
And so you used the power you had, as a daughter of a good customer and also of a man well known in the town, to punish the girl, just because she made you feel like that.
Yes, but it didn't seem to be anything very terrible at the time. Don't you understand? And if I could help her now, I would.
Yes, but you can't. It's too late. She's dead.
My God, it's a bit thick when you come to think of it.
Shut up, Eric! I know. It's the only time I've ever done anything like that, and I'll never do it again to anybody. Why had this to happen?
That's what I asked myself tonight when I was looking at that dead girl, and then I said to myself, well, we'll try to understand why it had to happen. And that's why I'm here, and why I'm not going until I know all that happened. Next, she changed her name to Daisy Renton.
What?
I said she changed her name to Daisy Renton.
Do you mind if I give myself a drink, Sheila?
Where's your father, Miss Burling?
He went into the drawing room to tell Mother what was happening here. Eric, take the inspector along to the drawing room. Well, Gerald?
Well, what, Sheila?
How did you come to know this girl, Eva Smith?
I didn't.
Daisy Renton, then. It's the same thing.
Why should I have known her?
Oh, don't be stupid. We haven't much time. You gave yourself away as soon as you mentioned her other name.
All right, I knew her. Let's leave it at that.
Can't leave it at that.
Now, listen, darling.
That's no use. You not only knew her, but you knew her very well. Otherwise, you wouldn't look so guilty about it. When did you first get to know her? Was it after she left Millward's? Were you seeing her last spring and summer during that time you hardly came near me and said you were so busy? Were you? Yes, of course you were.
I'm sorry, Sheila, but it was all over and done with last summer. I haven't set eyes on the girl for at least 6 months. I don't come into the suicide business.
I thought I didn't half an hour ago.
You don't. Neither of us does. So, for God's sake, don't say anything to the inspector.
About you and this girl?
Yes, and we can keep it from him.
Why, you fool. He knows. Of course he knows. And I hate to think how much he knows when we don't know yet. You'll see. You'll see.
Well,
You see? What did I tell you?
what did you tell him?
Inspector, I think Miss Burling ought to be excused any more of this questioning. She'd nothing more to tell you. She's had a long, exciting, and tiring day. We were celebrating our engagement, you know, and now she's obviously had about as much as she can stand. You heard her.
Well, I don't want to keep you here, Miss Burling. I've no more questions to ask you.
No, but you haven't finished asking questions, have you?
No.
You see? Then I'm staying.
Why should you? It's bound to be unpleasant and disturbing.
And you think young women ought to be protected against unpleasant and disturbing things?
If possible, yes.
Well, we know one young woman who wasn't, don't we?
Suppose I asked for that.
Definitely don't ask for more, Gerald.
I see.
What do you see?
You've been through it, and now you want to see somebody else put through it.
So that's what you think I'm like. I'm glad I realized it in time, Gerald.
No, I didn't mean...
Yes, you did. And if you really loved me, you wouldn't have said that.
I can tell you why Miss Burling wants to stay on and why she thinks it might be better for her. If she did. A girl died tonight. A pretty, lively sort of girl who never did anybody any harm. But she died in misery and agony, hating life.
No one, please. I know. And I can't stop thinking about it.
Now, Miss Burling has just been made to understand what she did to this girl. She feels responsible. And if she leaves us now and doesn't hear any more, then she'll feel she's entirely to blame. She'll be alone with her responsibility.
Yes, that's it. And I know I'm to blame. And I'm desperately sorry. But I can't believe it. I won't believe. It's simply my fault that in the end she committed suicide. That would be too horrible.
You see, we have to share something. If there's nothing else, we'll have to share our guilt.
Yes, that's true. You know, I don't understand about you.
There's no reason why you should.
Good evening, Inspector.
Good evening, madam.
I'm Mrs. Burling. My husband has just explained why you're here, and while we'll be glad to tell you anything you want to know, I don't think we can help much.
No, Mother, please.
What's the matter, Sheila?
You're beginning all wrong, and I'm afraid you'll say or do something you'll be sorry for afterwards.
I don't know what you're talking about,
We
Sheila.
all started like that, so confident, so pleased with ourselves, until he began asking us questions.
You seem to have made a great impression on this child, Inspector.
We often do in the young ones. They're more impressionable.
You're looking tired, Sheila, dear. I think you ought to go to bed and forget about this absurd business. You'll feel better in the morning.
Mother, I couldn't possibly go. Nothing could be worse for me. We've settled all that. I'm staying here until I know why that girl killed herself.
Nothing but morbid curiosity.
No, it isn't.
Please don't contradict me in that way, Sheila. And in any case, I don't suppose for a moment that we can understand why the girl committed suicide. Girls of that class...
Mother, don't, please, don't. For your own sake, as well as ours, you mustn't go on like that.
Mustn't? What? Really, Sheila?
You mustn't try to build up a kind of wall between us and that girl. If you do, then the inspector will just break it down. And it'll be all the worse when he does.
I don't understand you. Do you?
Yes, and she's right.
I beg your pardon.
I said yes, I do understand her, and she's right.
That I consider a trifle impertinent, Inspector. Now, what is it, Sheila?
I don't know. Perhaps it's because impertinent is such a silly word.
In any case, I'm talking to the inspector now, if you don't mind. I realize that you may have to conduct some sort of inquiry, but I must say that so far you seem to be conducting it in a rather peculiar and offensive manner. You know, of course, that my husband was mayor only 2 years ago and that he's still a judge.
Mrs. Burling, the inspector knows all that, and I don't think it's a very good idea to remind him.
It's crazy. Mother, stop it, please.
Yes. Now, what about Mr. Burling?
He's coming back in a moment. He's just talking to my son, Eric, who seems to be in a silly, excitable mood.
What's the matter with him?
Oh, Eric, I'm afraid he may have had too much to drink. We were having a little celebration here tonight.
Isn't he used to drinking?
No, of course not. He's only a boy.
No, he's a young man, and some young men drink far too much.
Eric's one of them.
Sheila!
I don't want to get poor Eric into trouble. He's probably in enough trouble already, but we really must stop these silly pretenses. This isn't the time to pretend that Eric isn't used to drink. He's been steadily drinking too much for the last 2 years.
It isn't true. You know him, Gerald, and you're a man. You must know it isn't true.
Well, Mr. Croft?
I'm afraid it is. You know, actually, I've never seen him much of him outside the house, but, well, I've gathered that he does drink pretty hard.
And this is the time you choose to tell me.
Yes, of course it is. That's what I meant when I talked about building up a wall that's sure to be knocked flat. It makes it all harder to bear.
But it's you and not the inspector here who's
Yes,
doing
but don't you see, he hasn't started on you yet.
If necessary, I shall be glad to answer any questions the inspector wishes to ask me. Though naturally, I don't know anything about this girl.
We'll see, Mrs. Burling.
I've been trying to persuade Eric to go to bed, but he won't. Now he says you told him to stay up. Did you?
Yes, I did.
Why?
Because I shall want to talk to him, Mr. Burling.
I can't see why you should, but if you must, then I suggest you do it now. Have him in and get it over with, and let the lad go.
No, I can't do that. I'm sorry, but he'll have to wait.
Well, now look here, Inspector.
He must wait his turn.
See?
No, I don't. And please be quiet, Sheila. Well, come along. What is it you want to know?
At the end of January last year, this girl, Eva Smith, had to leave Millwards because Miss Burling compelled them to discharge her, and then she stopped being Eva Smith, looking for a job, and became Daisy Renton with other ideas. Mr. Croft, when did you first get to know her?
Where did you get the idea that I did know her?
It's no use, Gerald. You're wasting time.
As soon as I mentioned the name Daisy Renton, it was obvious you'd known her. You gave yourself away at once.
Of course you did.
And anyhow, I knew already. When and where did you first meet her?
All right, if you must have it. I met her first sometime in March last year in the Staub's bar at the Palace. I mean, the Palace Music Hall here in Brumley.
Well, we didn't think you meant Buckingham Palace.
Thanks. You're going to be a great help, I can see. You said your piece, and you're obviously going to hate this, so why on earth don't you leave us to it?
It would induce me. I want to understand exactly what happens when a man says he's so busy at the works that he can hardly ever find time to come and see the girl he's supposed to be in love with. I wouldn't miss it for the world.
Yes, Mr. Croft, in the Stalls Bar at the Palace Variety Theatre.
I happened to look in one night after a long, dull day, and as the show wasn't very bright, I went down to the bar for a drink. It's a favorite haunt of women of the town.
Women of the town?
Yes, but I see no point in mentioning this subject, especially...
It would be much better if Sheila didn't listen to the story at all.
For forgetting that I'm supposed to be engaged to the hero of it. Go on, Gerald. You went down into the bar, which is a favorite haunt of women of the town, and you...
I'm glad I amuse you.
Come along, Mr. Croft. What happened?
I didn't propose to stay long down there. I hate those hard-eyed, dough-faced women. But then I noticed a girl who looked quite different. She was very pretty, soft brown hair and big dark eyes. My God.
What's the matter?
Sorry, I've suddenly realized, taken it in properly, that she's dead.
Yes, she's dead.
Probably between us, we killed her.
Sheila, don't talk nonsense.
You wait, Mother.
Go on.
She looked young and fresh and charming and altogether out of place down there. And obviously she wasn't enjoying herself. Old Joe Meggerty, half drunk and goggle-eyed, had wedged her into a corner with that obscene fat carcass of his.
There's no need to be disgusting, and surely you don't mean Sheriff Meggerty.
Of course I do. He's a notorious womanizer as well as being one of the worst drunks and rogues in Brumley.
Quite so.
Well, really? Sheriff Meggerty, I must say, we're learning something tonight.
Of course we are.
Go on, please.
The girl saw me looking at her and then gave me a glance that was nothing less than a cry for help. So I went across and told Joe Meggerty some nonsense, that the manager had a message for him or something like that, got him out of the way. and then told the girl that if she didn't want any more of that sort of thing, she'd better let me take her out of there. She agreed at once.
Where did you go?
We went along to the county hotel, which I knew would be quiet at that time of night, and we had a drink or two and talked.
Did she drink much at the time?
No. All she wanted was to talk, a little friendliness. And I gathered that Joe Meggerty's advances had left her rather shaken, as well they might.
She talked about herself?
Yes. She told me her name was Basie Renton, that she'd had a job at one of the works here and had to leave after a strike. She said something about the shop, too. What she did let slip, though she didn't mean to, was that she was desperately hard up and at that moment was actually hungry. I made the people at the hotel find some food for her.
And then you decided to keep her as your mistress?
What?
Of course, Mother. It was obvious from the start. Go on, Gerald. Don't mind, Mother.
I discovered, not that night, but 2 nights later, when we met again, not accidentally this time, of course, that in fact she hadn't a penny and was going to be turned out of the miserable back room she had. It happened that a friend of mine had gone off to Canada for 6 months and had let me have the key of a nice little set of rooms he had and had asked me to keep an eye on them for him and use them if I wanted to. So I insisted on Daisy moving into those rooms, and I made her take some money to keep her going there. I want you to understand that I didn't install her there so that I could make love to her. I was sorry for her. I didn't like the idea of her going back to the Palace Bar. I didn't ask for anything in return.
I see.
Yes, but why are you saying that to him? You ought to be saying it to me.
I suppose I ought, really. I'm sorry, Sheila. Somehow I
know. Somehow he makes you.
So she became your mistress?
Yes. I suppose it was inevitable. She was young and pretty and warm-hearted and intensely grateful. I became at once the most important person in her life, you understand.
Yes. She was lonely. Were you in love with her?
Just as I was going to ask, were you in love with her, Gerald?
It's hard to say. I didn't feel about her as she felt about me.
Of course not. You were the wonderful fairy prince. You must have adored it, Gerald.
All right, I did for a time. Nearly any man would have.
That's probably about the best thing you've said tonight. At least it's honest. Did you go and see her every night?
I don't think we want any further details of this disgusting affair.
I do. And anyhow, we haven't had any of the details yet.
And you're not going to have any. You know, it wasn't disgusting.
It's disgusting to me.
Is there anything else you want to know, Inspector, that you ought to know?
Yes. When did this affair end?
I can tell you exactly. In the first week of September. I had to go away for several weeks then on business, and by that time Daisy knew it was coming to an end. So I broke it off definitely before I went.
How did she take it?
Better than I'd hoped. She was very gallant about it.
How nice for you, huh?
No, it wasn't. She told me she'd been happier than she'd ever been before, but that she knew it couldn't last. I hadn't expected it to last. She didn't blame me at all. I wish to God she had now. Perhaps I'd feel better about it.
So she had to move out of those rooms?
Yes. We agreed about that. She'd saved a little money during the summer. She'd lived very economically on what I had allowed her and didn't want to take any more from me, but I insisted on a parting gift of enough money, though it wasn't so very much, to see her through to the end of the year.
Did she tell you what she proposed to do after you'd left her?
No, she refused to talk about that. I got the idea once or twice from what she said that she thought of leaving Brumley. Whether she did or not, I don't know. Did she?
Yes. She went away for about 2 months to some seaside place.
By herself?
Yes. I think she went away to be alone, to be quiet, to remember all that had happened between you.
How do you know that?
She kept a rough sort of diary, and she said there that she had to go away and be quiet and remember just to make it last longer. She felt she'd never be anything as good for her again, so she had to make it last longer.
I see. Well, I never saw her again. And that's all I can tell you.
It's all I want to know from you.
In that case, I'm rather more upset by this business than I probably appear to be. And I'd like to be alone for a while. I'd be glad if you'd let me go.
Go where? Home?
No, I'll just go out, walk about for a while if you don't mind. I'll come back.
All right, Mr. Croft.
But just in case you forget or decide not to come back, Gerald, I think you'd better take this with you.
I see. Well, I was expecting this.
I don't dislike you as I did half an hour ago, Gerald. But this has made a difference. You and I aren't the same people who sat down to dinner here. We'd have to start all over again, getting to know each other.
No, Sheila, I'm not defending him, but you must understand that a lot of young men...
Don't interfere, please, Father. Gerald knows what I mean,
Yes.
and you apparently don't.
Yes, I know what you mean. But I'm coming back, if I may.
Well, really, I don't know. I think we've come to just about the end of this wretched business.
I don't think so. Excuse me.
Now, you never showed him that photograph of her.
No. It wasn't necessary, and I thought it better not to.
You have a photograph of this girl?
Yes. I think you'd better take a look at it.
I don't see any particular reason why I should.
Probably not, but you'd better look at it.
Very well.
You recognize her?
No. Why should I?
Well, of course, she might have changed lately, but I can't believe she could have changed so much.
I don't understand you, Inspector.
You mean you don't choose to, Mrs. Burling?
I mean what I said.
You're not telling me the truth.
I beg your pardon.
Look here, I'm not going to have this, Inspector. But you'll apologize at once.
Apologize for what? Doing my duty?
No, for being so offensive about it. I'm a public man and...
Public men, Mr. Burling, have responsibilities as well as privileges.
Possibly. But you weren't asked here to talk to me about my responsibilities.
Let's hope not. Though I'm beginning to wonder...
Does that mean anything, Sheila?
It means we've no excuse for putting on airs. And that if we've any sense, we won't try. I know jolly well you did in fact recognize her from the way you looked at. And if you're not telling the truth, why should the inspector apologize? And can't you see, both of you, that you're making it worse?
Utter nonsense.
Who was that? Ah,
Gerald must have come back.
Unless your son has just gone out.
I'll see.
Mrs. Burling, you're a member, a prominent member, of the Bromley Women's Charity Organization, aren't you?
Go on, Mother. You might as well admit it. Yes, she is. Why?
It's an organization to which women in distress can appeal for help in various forms, isn't that so?
Yes. We've done a great deal of useful work in helping deserving cases.
There was a meeting of the interviewing committee 2 weeks ago.
I dare say there was.
No, very well there was, Mrs. Burling. You were in the chair.
And if I was, what business is it of yours?
Do you want me to tell you in plain words?
It must have been Eric we saw go just then.
Silly boy, where can he have gone to?
I can't imagine, but he's one of his excitable, queer moods, and even though we don't need him here...
We do need him here, and if he's not back soon, I shall have to go find him.
Probably just gone to cool off. He'll be back soon.
I hope so.
And why should you hope so?
I'll explain why when you've answered my questions, Mrs. Burling.
Is there a reason why my wife should answer questions from you, Inspector?
Yes, a very good reason. You remember that Mr. Croft told us, quite truthfully, I believe, that he hadn't spoken to or seen Eva Smith since last September. Yeah. But Mrs. Burling spoke to and saw her only 2 weeks ago.
Father.
Is this true?
Yes, quite true.
She appealed to your organization for help.
Yes.
Not as Eva Smith.
No, nor as Daisy Renton.
As what, then?
First, she called herself Mrs. Burling.
Mrs. Burling?
Yes, and I think it was simply a piece of gross impertinence, quite deliberate. And naturally, that was one of the things that prejudiced me against her case.
And I should think so. Damned impudence.
You admit being prejudiced against her case?
Yes.
Mother, she's just died a horrible death. don't forget.
I'm very sorry, but I think she had only herself to blame.
Was it owing to your influence as the most prominent member of the committee that help was refused the girl?
Possibly.
Was it or was it not your influence?
Yes, it was. I didn't like her manner. She'd impertinently made use of our name, though she pretended afterward that it just happened to be the first that she thought of. She had to admit, after I began questioning her, that she had no claim to the name, that she wasn't married, and that the story she told at first about a husband who had deserted her was quite false. It didn't take me long to get the truth, or some of the truth, out of her.
Why did she want help?
You know very well why she wanted help.
No, I don't. I know why she needed help. But as I wasn't there, I don't know what she asked from your committee.
I don't think we need to discuss it.
You have no hope of not discussing it, Mrs. Burling.
If you think you can bring any pressure to bear upon me, Inspector, you're quite mistaken. Unlike the other three, I did nothing I was ashamed of or that won't bear investigation. The girl asked for assistance. I wasn't satisfied with her claim. She seemed to me not a good case, and so I used my influence to have it refused. And in spite of what has happened to the girl since, I consider I did my duty. So if I prefer not to discuss it any further, you have no power to make me change my mind.
Yes, I have.
No, you haven't. Simply because I've done nothing wrong, and you know it.
I think you did something terribly wrong and that you're going to spend the rest of your life regretting it. I wish you'd been with me tonight in the infirmary. You'd have seen...
No, please. Not again. I've imagined it enough already.
And the next time you imagine it, just remember that this girl was going to have a child.
Oh, no! Oh, horrible. Horrible. How could she have wanted to kill herself?
Because she'd been turned out and turned down too many times. This was the end.
Mother, you must have known.
It was because she was going to have a child that she went for assistance to your mother's committee.
Look here, this wasn't Gerald Croft.
Oh, no, nothing to do with him.
Thank goodness for that. Though I don't know why I should care now.
And you've nothing further to tell me, eh?
I'll tell you what I told her. Go and look for the father of the child. It's his responsibility.
It doesn't make it any the less yours. She came to you for help at a time when no woman could have needed it more, and you not only refused it yourself, but saw to it that the others refused it too. She was here alone, friendless, penniless, desperate. She needed not only money, but advice, sympathy, friendliness. You've had children. You must have known what she was feeling, and you slammed the door in her face.
I think it was cruel and vile.
I must say, Sybil, that when this comes out of the inquest, it's not going to do us much good. The press might easily take it up.
Stop it, both of you. In the circumstances, I think I was justified. The girl had begun telling us a pack of lies. Afterward, when I got at the truth, I discovered that she knew who the father was. She was quite certain about that. And so I told her it was her business to make him responsible. If he refused to marry her, and in my opinion, I think he ought to be compelled to, then he must at least support her.
And what did she reply to that?
Oh, a lot of silly nonsense.
What was it?
Whatever it was, I know it finally made me lose all patience with her. She was giving herself ridiculous airs. She was claiming elaborate fine feelings and scruples that were simply absurd in a girl of her position.
Her position now is that she lies with a burnt-out inside on a slab. Don't stammer and yammer at me again, man. I'm losing all patience with you people. What did she say?
She said that the father was only a youngster, silly and wild and drinking too much, that there couldn't be any question of him marrying her. It would be wrong for them both. He had given her money, but she didn't want to take any more money from him.
Why didn't she want to take any more money from him?
A lot of nonsense. I didn't believe a word of it.
I'm not asking you if you believed it. I want to know what she said. Why didn't she want to take any more money from this boy?
Her story was that he'd said something one night when he was drunk that gave her the idea that it wasn't his money.
Where had he got it from then?
He'd stolen it.
So she'd come to you for assistance because she didn't want to take stolen money.
That's the story she finally told after I'd refused to believe her original story, that she was a married woman who'd been deserted by her husband. I didn't see any reason to believe that one story should be any truer than the other. Therefore, you're quite wrong to suppose that I shall regret what I did.
But if her story was true, If this boy had been giving her stolen money, then she came to you for help because she wanted to keep this youngster out of any more trouble. Isn't that so?
Possibly, but it sounded so ridiculous to me, so I was perfectly justified in advising my committee not to allow her claim for assistance.
You're not even sorry now, when you know what happened to the girl.
I'm sorry that she should have come to such a horrible end, but I accept no blame for it at all.
Who is to blame, then?
First, the girl herself.
Your father and me have her chucked out of her jobs.
Second, I blame the young man who was the father of her child she was going to have. If, as she said, he didn't belong to her class and was some drunken young idler, then that's all the more reason why he shouldn't escape. He should be made an example of. If the girl's death is due to anybody, then it's due to him.
And if her story is true, that he was stealing money?
There's no point in assuming that.
But suppose we do. What then?
But then he'd be entirely responsible.
So he's the chief culprit anyhow.
Certainly, and he ought to be dealt with very severely.
Oh, Mother, stop. Stop.
Be quiet, Sheila.
But don't you see?
You're behaving like an hysterical child tonight. And Inspector, if you take some steps to find this young man and then make sure that he's compelled to confess in public his responsibility, instead of staying here asking quite unnecessary questions, then you really would be doing your duty.
Don't worry, Mrs. Burling. I shall do my duty.
I'm glad to hear it.
Oh, no hushing up, eh? Make an example of this young man in public. Public confession of responsibility.
Certainly, I consider it your duty. And now, no doubt, you'd like to say good night.
Not yet. I'm waiting
Waiting? For what?
to do my duty.
Now, Mother, don't you see?
But surely, I mean, it's ridiculous.
Look, Inspector, you're not trying to tell us that my boy, my boy is mixed up with this.
If he is, then we know what to do, don't we? Mrs. Burling has just told us.
Oh my God. But look here.
I don't believe it. I won't believe it.
Mother, I begged you and begged you to stop.
You know, don't you?
Yes, we know.
Eric, I can't believe it. There must be some mistake. You don't know what we've been saying.
Job for him he doesn't, isn't it?
Why?
Because Mother's been busy blaming everything on the young man who got this girl into trouble. And saying he shouldn't escape and should be made an example
That's
of.
enough, Sheila.
You haven't made it any easier for me, have you, Mother?
But I didn't know it was you. I never dreamt. Besides, you're not the type. You don't get drunk.
He does. I told you he did.
You told her. Why, you little sneak.
Just a minute. I must hear what you have to tell me. When did you first meet this girl?
In the Palace Bar. I'd been there an hour or so with 2 or 3 of the chaps. I was a bit squiffy.
What happened then?
I began talking to her, stood her a few drinks. I was rather far gone by the time we had to go.
You went with her to her lodgings that night?
Yes, I insisted, it seems. I'm not very clear about it, but afterwards she told me she didn't want me to go in, but that... Well, I was in that state when a chap easily turns nasty, and I threatened to make a row.
So she let you in?
Yes, and that's when it happened. And I didn't even remember. That's the hellish thing. My God, how stupid it is.
Eric, how could you?
When did you meet her again?
About a fortnight
You
afterwards.
took her home again,
Yes,
and you made love again.
yes,
Did you arrange to see each other after that?
yes. And the next time, the time after that, she told me she thought she was going to have a baby. She wasn't quite sure, and then she was.
And of course, she was very worried about it.
Yes, and so was I. I was in a hell of a state about it.
Did she suggest that you ought to marry her?
No, she didn't want me to marry her. Said I didn't love her, and all that. In a way, she treated me as if I were a kid, though I was nearly as old as she was.
So what did you propose to do?
She hadn't a job. I insisted on giving her enough money to keep her going. Until she refused to take any more.
How much did you give her altogether?
About, I suppose, $150 all told.
$150 on top of drinking and going around the town? Say, where did you get $150 from?
That's my question, too.
I got it from the office.
My office?
Yes.
You mean you stole the money?
No, not really.
What do you mean, not really?
Eric, you stole money?
No, not really. I intended to pay it back.
Well, we've heard that story before. Oh, you damn fool. Why didn't you come to me when you found yourself in this mess?
Because you're not the kind of father a chap can go to when he's in trouble. That's why.
Don't talk to me like that. Your trouble is you've been spoiled.
This girl discovered that this money you were giving her was stolen, didn't she?
Yes. Yes, that was the worst of it. She wouldn't take any more, and she didn't want to see me again. Here, how did you know that? Did she tell you?
No, she told me nothing. I never spoke to her.
Old mother.
Sheila.
Well, he has to know.
He told you. Did she come here? She wouldn't have done. She didn't even know I lived here. What happened? Come on, don't just look at me like that. Tell me. Tell me what happened.
I'll tell you. She went to your mother's committee for help after she'd done with you. Your mother refused that help.
Then you killed her. She came to you to protect me, and you turned her away. Yes, and killed her, and the child she'd have had too. My child, your own grandchild. You killed them both. Damn you. Damn you.
Oh, Eric, please, I didn't know. I didn't understand.
You don't understand anything. You never did. You never even tried.
Don't.
Why, you hysterical young fool!
Stop! And be quiet for a moment and listen to me. I don't need to know any more. Neither do you. This girl killed herself and died a horrible death. But each of you helped to kill her. Remember that. Never forget it. But then I don't think you ever will. Remember what you did, Mrs. Burling. You turned her away when she most needed help. You refused her even the pitiable little bit of organized charity you had in your power to grant you. And you, remember what you did.
God, I'm not likely to forget.
Just used her for the end of a stupid, drunken evening as if she was an animal, a thing, not a person. No, you won't forget.
I know. I had her turned out of a job. I started it.
You helped, but you didn't start it. You started it, Mr. Burling. She wanted $11 a week instead of 10. You made her pay a heavy price for that, and now she'll make you pay a heavier price still.
Look, Inspector, I'll give thousands. Yes, thousands.
You're offering money at the wrong time, Mr. Burling. No, I don't think any of you will forget. Nor that young man Croft, though he at least had some affection for her and made her happy for a time. Well, Eva Smith's gone. You can't do her any more harm, and you can't do her any good now either. You can't even say, "I'm sorry, Eva Smith."
That's the worst of it.
But just remember this. One Eva Smith has gone, but there are millions and millions and millions of Eva Smiths and John Smiths still left with us, with their lives, their hopes and fears, their suffering and chance of happiness, all intertwined with our lives and what we think and say and do. We don't live alone. We are members of one body. We are responsible for each other. And I tell you that the time will soon come, if men will not learn that lesson, then they will be taught it in fire and blood and anguish. Good night.
You're the one I blame for this.
I bet I am.
Yes, and you don't realize yet all you've done. Most of it is bound to come out. There'll be a public scandal.
Well, I don't care now.
Yeah, you don't seem to care about anything. Oh, but I care. I was almost certain for an ambassadorship in the next administration.
For God's sake, what does it matter now, whether they give you an ambassadorship or not?
Oh, it doesn't matter to you. Apparently nothing matters to you. But it may interest you to know that until every penny of that money you stole is repaid, you'll work for nothing. And there's going to be no more of this drinking around town and picking up women at the palace bar.
You think not. Eric, I'm absolutely ashamed of you.
Well, I don't blame you. But don't forget, I'm ashamed of you as well. Yes, both of you.
Drop that! There's every excuse for what both your mother and I did. It turned out unfortunately, that's all.
That's all.
Oh, what do you have to say?
I don't know where to begin.
Then don't begin. Nobody wants you to.
I behaved badly, too. I know I did. I'm ashamed of it. But now you're beginning all over again to pretend that nothing much has happened.
Nothing much has happened. Haven't I already said there'll be a public scandal? Unless we're lucky. And who here will suffer from that more than I will?
But that's not what I'm talking about. I don't care about that. The point is, you don't seem to have learned anything.
Oh, don't I? Well, you're quite wrong there. I've learned plenty. Oh, and I look back on tonight. When I think of what I was feeling when the five of us sat down at this table,
Yes. And do you remember what you said to Gerald and me after dinner when you were feeling so pleased with yourself? You told us that a man has to make his own way, look after himself and mind his own business, and that we weren't to take any notice of these cranks who tell us that everybody has to look out for everybody else. Do you remember? Yes, and then one of those cranks walked in, the inspector. I did notice you told him that it's every man for himself.
Is that when the inspector came in? Just after Father had said that?
Yes, what of it?
Now what's the matter, Sheila?
Queer. Very queer.
I know what you're going to say. I've been wondering myself.
It doesn't much matter now, of course, but was he really a police inspector?
well, if he wasn't, it matters a devil of a lot. Makes all the difference.
No, it doesn't.
Don't talk rubbish. Of course it does.
It doesn't to me, and it oughtn't to you either.
Now, don't be childish, Sheila.
I'm not being. If you want to know, it's you two who are being childish, trying not to face the facts.
I won't have any of that sort of talk. Any more of it, and you can just leave the room.
That'll be terrible for her, won't it?
I'm going anyhow in a minute or two. But don't you see, if all that's come out tonight is true, then it doesn't much matter who it was who made us confess. And it was true, wasn't it? You turned the girl out of one job, and I had her turned out of another. Gerald kept her at a time when he was supposed to be too busy to see me. Eric, well, we know what Eric did. And Mother hardened her heart and gave her the final push that finished her. That's what's important. And not whether a man is a police inspector or not. But if it's any comfort to you, and it wasn't to me, I have an idea. And I had it all along vaguely, that there was something curious about him. He never seemed like an ordinary police inspector.
You're right. I felt it too. Didn't you?
Well, I must say his manner was quite extraordinary. So rude and assertive.
And then look at the way he talked to me, telling me to shut up, and so on. He must have known I was an ex-mayor and a judge and so forth. Besides, the way he talked, you remember? I mean, they just don't talk like that. I've had dealings with dozens of them.
Right, but it doesn't make any real difference, you know.
Of course it does.
No, Sheila's right, it doesn't.
We hardly ever told him anything he didn't know. Did you notice that?
Well, he had a bit of information left by the girl and made a few smart guesses. The fellow obviously didn't like us. He was prejudiced from the start. Oh, probably a socialist or some kind of crank. He talked like one. And then, instead of standing up to him, you let him bluff you into talking about our private affairs. You ought to have stood up to him.
I didn't notice you standing up to him.
Now, just be quiet so that your father can decide what we ought to do.
Yes, well, we'll have to do something and get to work quickly, too. Oh, now, who's this? Had I better go?
No, Edna will go. I asked her to wait up to make us some tea.
Miss soft.
I hope you don't mind my coming back.
No, of course not, Gerald.
I had a special reason for coming. When did that inspector go?
A few minutes ago. He put us all through it.
Sheila!
Gerald might as well know.
Now, we needn't bother him with all that stuff.
All right. But we're all in it. Up to the neck. It got worse after you left.
How did he behave?
He was frightening.
If you ask me, he behaved in a very peculiar and suspicious manner.
A rude way he spoke to Mr. Burling and me. It was quite extraordinary.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You know something, don't you? What is it?
That man wasn't a police officer.
What?
Are you certain?
I'm almost certain. That's what I came back to tell you.
Good lad. You asked about him, eh?
Yes, I met a police sergeant I know down the road. I asked him about that Inspector Gould and described the chap carefully to him. He swore there wasn't any Inspector Gould or anybody like him on the force here.
By jingo, a fake!
Didn't I tell you? Didn't I say I couldn't imagine a real inspector talking to us like that?
Well, you were right. There isn't any such inspector. We've been had.
I'm going to make certain of this.
What are you going to do?
Ring up the chief constable, Colonel Roberts.
Careful of what you say, dear.
Of course. Brumley 8752. I was going to do this anyhow. I had my suspicions all along. Colonel Roberts, please. Mr. Arthur Burling here. Oh, Roberts! Burling here. Yeah, sorry to bring you up so late, but can you tell me if an Inspector Gould has joined your staff lately? Oh, yes, Gould. Goole. Yes, a new man. Tall, bearded. Oh, I see. Yes. Well, that settles it. No, just a little argument we were having. Good night. There's no Inspector Gould on the police. That man definitely wasn't a police inspector. As Gerald said, we've been had.
I felt it all the time. He never talked like one. He never even looked like one.
Oh, this makes a difference, you know. In fact, it makes all the difference.
Of course.
Because we're all nice people now.
And if you've got nothing more sensible to say, Sheila, you'd better keep quiet.
He's right, though.
And you'd better keep quiet anyhow. If that were a police inspector and he'd heard you confess.
Arthur, careful.
Oh, yes.
You see, Gerald, you haven't to know the rest of our crimes and idiocies.
That's all right. I don't want to. What do you make of this business now, Mr. Burling? Was it a hoax?
Of course. Someone put that fellow up to coming here and hoaxing us. Oh, there are people in this town who dislike me enough to do that. We ought to have seen through it from the first. In the ordinary way, I believe I would have. But coming like that, bang on top of our little celebration, just when we were all feeling so pleased with ourselves, well, naturally it took me by surprise.
You're beginning to pretend now that nothing's really happened at all, and I can't see it. I can't see it like that. This girl's still dead, isn't she? Nobody's brought her to life, have they?
Just what I feel, Eric. And it's as if they don't seem to understand.
Whoever that chap was, the fact remains that I did what I did, and Mother did what she did, and the rest of you did what you did to her. It's still the same rotten story, whether it's been told to a police inspector or to somebody else.
Either stop shouting or get out. Some fathers I know would have kicked you out of the house anyhow by this time. So hold your tongue if you want to stay here.
I don't give a damn now whether I stay here or not.
Oh, you'll stay here long enough to give me account of the money you stole. Yes, and pay it back too.
But that won't bring Eva Smith back to life, will it?
Doesn't alter the fact that we all helped kill her.
But is it a fact?
Of course it is. You don't know the whole story yet.
I suppose you're going to prove now you didn't spend last summer keeping this girl instead of me, eh?
I did keep a girl last summer. I've admitted it. I'm sorry, Sheila.
Oh, I must admit you came out of it better than the rest of us. The inspector said that.
He wasn't an inspector.
Well, he inspected us, all right. And don't let's start dodging and pretending now. Between us, we drove that girl to commit suicide.
Did we? Who says so? Because I say There's no more real evidence we did that than there was that that chap was a police officer.
Of course there is.
No, there isn't. Look at it. A man comes here pretending to be a police officer. It's a hoax of some kind. Now, what does he do? Very artfully, working on bits of information he's picked up here and there, he bluffs us into confessing that we've all been mixed up in this girl's life in one way or another.
And so we have.
But how do you know it's the same girl? Look here. Mr. Burr, you sack a girl called Eva Smith. You've forgotten, but he shows you a photograph of her and then you remember, right?
Yes, that's part straightforward enough, but what then?
Well, then he happens to know that Sheila once had a girl sacked from Millwood's shop. He tells us that it's the same Eva Smith, and he shows her a photograph that she recognizes.
Yeah, it's the same photograph.
How do you know it's the same photograph? Did you see the one your father looked at?
No, I didn't.
And did your father see the one he showed you?
No, he didn't. And I see what you mean now.
No proof it was the same photograph, and therefore no proof it was the same girl. Now take me. I never saw a photograph, remember? He caught me out by suddenly announcing that this girl changed her name to Daisy Renton. I gave myself away at once because I'd known a Daisy Renton.
And there wasn't the slightest proof that this Daisy Renton was really Eva Smith.
But Mother, don't forget that he showed you a photograph of the girl before that, and you obviously recognized it.
Did anybody else see it?
No, he showed it only to me.
Then don't you see? There's still no proof it was really the same girl.
Gerald's dead right. He could have used a different photograph every time, and we'd be none the wiser. We may all have been recognizing different girls.
Exactly. Did he ask you to identify a photograph, Eric?
No, he didn't need a photograph by the time he got round to me, but obviously it must have been the girl I knew, who went to see Mother.
Why must it?
She said she had to help because she wouldn't take any more stolen money, and the girl I knew had told me that already.
Even then, that may have been all nonsense.
I don't see much nonsense about it when a girl goes and kills herself.
What girl? There were probably 4 or 5 girls.
It doesn't matter to me. The one I knew is dead.
Is she? How do we know she is? How do we know any girl killed herself today?
We can settle that at once.
Oh.
By ringing up the infirmary. Either there's a dead girl there, or there isn't.
And if there isn't...
Anyway, we'll see. Really? 89986. Is that the infirmary? Yeah, this is Mr. Gerald Croft of Crofts Limited. Yes. We're rather worried about one of our employees. I mean, you had a girl brought in this afternoon who committed suicide by drinking disinfectant or any like suicide. Yes, I'll wait. Yes? Oh, you're certain of that? I see. Well, thank you very much. Good night. No girl has died in there today. Nobody's been brought in after drinking disinfectant. They haven't had a suicide for months.
There you are. Proof positive. The whole story's just a lot of moonshine. Nothing but an elaborate cell.
Frightens me the way you talk.
Nonsense! You'll have a good laugh over it yet. Look, you better ask Gerald for that ring back you gave back to him, hadn't you? Then you'll feel better.
You're pretending everything just as it was before.
I'm not.
No, but these others are.
Well, isn't it? We've been had, that's all.
Nothing really happened. So there's nothing to be sorry for, nothing to learn. We can all go on behaving just as we did.
Well, why shouldn't we?
I tell you, whoever that inspector was, it was anything but a joke. You knew it then. You began to learn something. And now you stopped. You're ready to go on in the same old way.
And you're not.
No, because I remember what he said, how he looked, what he made me feel. Fire and blood and anguish. And it frightens me the way you talk, and I can't listen to any more of it.
I agree with Sheila. It frightens me too.
Oh, well, go to bed then. And don't stand there being hysterical.
They're overtired. In the morning, they'll be as amused as we are.
Everything's all right now, Sheila. What about this ring?
Oh, not yet. It's too soon, Gerald. I must think.
Oh, now look at the pair of them. The famous younger generation know it all. And they can't even take a joke. Got it. Yes. Yes, Mr. Burling speaking. What? No, here, that was the police. A girl has just died on her way to the infirmary after swallowing some disinfectant. And a police inspector is on his way here to ask some questions.
In An Inspector Calls by J.B. Priestley, the part of the inspector was played by Brad Sperber, Mr. Burling by Brian Monsell, Mrs. Burling by Kelly Newman O'Connor, Joe Croft by Michael Novello, Sheila Burling by Sophie Cameron, Eric Burling by Sam Felsenthal, and Edna by Maddie Sperber White, with editing done by Liz Porter. If you enjoyed the show and would like to see more theater group readings, please consider making a donation, whatever amount, at our website, luminastudio.org. We certainly appreciate all that you can do. On Sunday, October 25th, on the Lumina channel, please join us for a Halloween season treat with Dracula by Bram Stoker, adapted by Jordan Friend. Good night, and stay safe, and have a good evening.